we knew we want to use mobile devices as the platform for a new Diablo game.
Hey, just was wondering, is this an out-of-season April Fool's joke?
AAA game studios wouldn't know what their players wanted if they straight up told them. Which they do, frequently. But hey, there's no way these companies are going to hear that feedback over the sound of all that money. I mean, they didn't even hear the hundreds of sexual assault allegations, and those calls were coming from inside the house. They don't care about you, they don't care about their employees, and they certainly don't care about putting out good games. They only care about money. And as hard as it's been to watch the greedy old guys ruin literally everything from movies to the housing market, the destruction of the game industry is the one that I take the most personally. So let's talk about it. Honestly, picking on EA kind of feels like cheating at this point. They were voted worst company in America in the 2012 and 2013 polls conducted by Consumerist, and I imagine they only lost that title because people have realized how awful literally every massive corporation is. There's even a whole Wikipedia page called Criticism of Electronic Arts, which I really encourage you to read. There's just so much to hate about them, from their almost colonial acquisitions and destructions of cooler studios to the fact that CEO Andrew Wilson looks like my mom's ex-boyfriend. That second one might be a bit personal, but I promise you wouldn't like him either. I could literally make a whole video on EA alone, but it's been done before, so let's just talk about the Star Wars Battlefront games. The PS2 era Battlefronts were fucking awesome, and for years fans had been begging for a remake. Now, since EA America had Pandemic Studios, the original creators of the Battlefront games, it was up to them to reboot the series. And they did. They heard our pleas and said, "We got you." Only they didn't have us. What they had was a fraction of the content of the original games with better graphics, which, let's be honest, was not surprising. 2 years go by and EA announces Battlefront 2. Andrew Wilson promises that they've learned from their mistakes, they have listened to their players, and they are ready to give them exactly what they want. Personally, I think it's really strange that the players said we want a disgusting pay-to-win piece of shit, but they must have, because that's what Battlefront 2 was. Of course, there's always the possibility that EA just didn't give an Ewok's nutsack what the players wanted and just figured that if they said they did, they'd make a profit on pre-orders. Then it wouldn't matter whether or not the game was anything like they said it would be, because they'd already have the money. Either way, it was what it was, and what it was garbage. Players could pay real money for upgrades that would give them an objective edge in combat, and characters like Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker, you know, the main fucking characters of Star Wars, were locked behind a paywall. Of course, you could technically unlock them by playing the game, but someone on Reddit did the math and realized it would take 40 hours to unlock one hero. And EA's response to this is still, to this day, the single most downvoted comment on Reddit. Go ahead and pause the video if you feel like reading the whole thing, but if you don't, here's the important bit. The intent is to provide players with a sense of pride and accomplishment for unlocking different heroes. Okay, no one who plays video games would think that a 40-hour grind to unlock a character in a game you already paid $60 for would give you anything even resembling a sense of pride and accomplishment. That's an entire freaking work week. Most Star Wars fans are adults with jobs and responsibilities and things that make their life a grind already. You would have to be either ridiculously out of touch or just straight up fucking awful to think that your player base deserves to have the same earn your happiness bullshit forced into their leisure time that modern society has forced into every other facet of their lives. In the case of EA, I think they're both out of touch and just fucking awful. Oh, Ubisoft. Very much the 80s low-budget horror movie creators of the game industry, in that every sequel they make is some degree worse than the original. Now, if you can look past the fact that 25% of their workforce has admitted to seeing or experiencing workplace misconduct, then they're not all that bad. At the very least, they're not the absolute force of evil that EA is, but they're also not particularly good at making video games. I mean, their entire business is built on the backs of like 2 IPs that they're just milking to absolute death, creating essentially the same game year after year, doing the same thing over and over, expecting it to change.
Did I ever tell you the definition of insanity?
But hey, that's not so bad. Maybe they're not all that out of touch.
And maybe scallops will fly out of my pants!
Now, this game isn't even out yet, so I can't bash it for whatever ridiculous fuck shit I know they're gonna try to pull with this free-to-play blast of ass, but honestly, I don't think I need any of that to prove my point here. Let's just look past the fact that the entire art direction feels like someone's dad trying to prove that they're still hip to what the kids jive with. Just ignore that for a second and look right here. This. Tom Clancy's X-Defiant. Who's Tom Clancy, you ask? Well, long story short, Tom Clancy is a guy who wrote military books that turned into military movies and later military games. Back in the late 90s, his name carried some weight, so he started a game company called Red Storm Entertainment and started putting his name on all the games in an attempt to sell more copies. And it kinda worked. Enough so that when Ubisoft acquired Red Storm Entertainment in 2000, they continued to use his name, and over time it essentially became synonymous with games that could be described as gritty and tactical. That's pretty much where my knowledge about the guy ends. I know nothing about him as an author and couldn't give less of a shit about him as a person, but some of the games bearing his name were fantastic. The Splinter Cell series are some of the finest stealth games ever made, and there was a time where if you would have asked me what my favorite shooter was, I would have said Rainbow Six Siege with zero hesitation. Now, I'd argue that Ubisoft hasn't made a good Tom Clancy game since Siege, and there's a really strong argument to be made that they've ruined that game now too, but at least everything under the TC umbrella up to this point could be described as gritty and tactical. So what the fuck is this? I'll tell you what it looks like, a generic Call of Duty clone with hero shooter elements. It's so far removed from anything the Tom Clancy IP is known for that it's painfully obvious Ubisoft is willing to slap the name on anything nowadays. Combine that with the fact that they've been trying their absolute hardest to turn Ghost Recon into their third shitty copy-pasta IP, and we can draw a pretty strong conclusion that Ubisoft has completely lost touch with Tom Clancy fans and what it is that drew them to the games in the first place. And I can already hear the devil's advocates of the world crying out, but it seems like they're just trying to breathe new life into a tired IP. Well, that's bullshit. They could have easily made this game its own thing and nobody would have cared. Imagine if Activision announced a new Call of Duty game and was like, yeah, no real guns in this one. It's nerf or nothing. People would be fucking pissed. So hey, here's an idea. How about instead of trying to reboot every fucking thing that's ever made money, we retire dried up IPs and come up with some new ideas? And look, I'm all for remakes of old classics, but not when they're served up in place of new games that don't suck. If I had to put my finger on the three biggest issues with AAA game companies, it would be their greed, their complete lack of original thought, and their incessant need to appeal to the widest possible audience. Did somebody say widest possible audience? The fact that I have to use Bethesda as an example in this video really hurts, man. I'm literally in love with the Elder Scrolls series. I own like 4 different copies of Skyrim. Now, Bethesda has definitely been throwing up red flags for a minute now. They, like every other greedy company, never release a finished game. It's always full price for a buggy mess that we might fix later, and also we'll add more content, but you have to pay more for that. They also have a habit of stripping down their mechanics to, you guessed it, appeal to the widest possible audience. Now, I don't think that there's anything inherently wrong with streamlining an experience to make it more accessible. Honestly, a big part of game design is looking at past games and saying, how can I improve on what this game did? And a lot of the time, that just means making things easier to understand or trimming needless fat. But when you have an IP like Fallout or the Elder Scrolls where choices are supposed to matter and you start making them matter less and less because you're afraid new players won't like that their actions have consequences, you're not streamlining the experience, you're watering it down. And while Skyrim was still a good game, Fallout 4 was so freaking linear, I almost felt like I was playing Call of Duty Apocalypse. I don't want to turn this into a lesson on game design, but the long and short of it is, don't compromise your vision to appeal to a larger audience. I call it the Field of Dreams principle. If you build it, and build it with passion, they will come, and if they don't, fuck them. Anyway, the cardinal sin that got Bethesda on this list probably isn't a surprise to anyone who likes their games. Boom. Fallout 76, aka multiplayer Fallout. It was a solid idea, and Borderlands already showed us how kick-ass multiplayer FPS RPGs could be. The skeleton was there, they just had to cover it with flesh and organs and stuff. Full disclosure, I didn't think for a single second that this game was going to be anything other than horrible. Considering how threadbare their single-player experiences were becoming, I had zero faith that they would be able to pull off a multiplayer experience that wasn't just 4 people going around shooting shit and doing fetch quests. Which really wouldn't have been that bad if they had steered into that without arbitrarily adding the name Fallout to the game's title. You're probably noticing a theme here. Anyway, pop quiz. You've just promised fans of a long-running RPG series a multiplayer iteration on their favorite game. Do you A, put this project in the hands of your best development team? B, put this project in the hands of the team with the most experience working on this particular IP? Or C, put this project in the hands of your newest and most inexperienced team? 15 seconds on the clock. Alright, fuck you, you don't need 15 seconds. If you answered C, congratulations, you're a dumbass, which apparently qualifies you to make decisions at Bethesda. To summarize, Bethesda's main studio in Maryland was, and still is, busy developing The Elder Scrolls VI and that space shooter no one asked for, so they couldn't really spare the manpower. Logic would dictate that's a pretty good reason to just, not make the game, but this video isn't called AAA Studios are famous for their good judgment. So they handed it off to Bethesda Game Studios Austin, formerly Battlecry Studios, whose entire pedigree includes a cancelled hero shooter and assisting id with post-release multiplayer content for Doom 2016. So, fuck all, basically. And look, I'm not trying to shit on inexperienced dev teams. My dev team is an inexperienced dev team, and I like to think we do solid work. Wouldn't trust us to make a Fallout game, though. It was just so far removed from anything Battlecry had done. Like, what was the logic here? Yeah, Doom has guns, Fallout has guns, they're basically the same game. That's like trusting your 14-year-old to build you a house because he's killer at Fortnite. And I'm not saying the devs couldn't have made a decent open-world RPG shooter, they very well might have, but their proving ground should never have been the Fallout series. And this, I think, illustrates the problem at hand. Fans were already a bit up in arms about how restrictive Fallout 4 felt compared to other games in the series, and Bethesda's response to these concerns was to do this? It just shows that their concern wasn't at all appeasing fans or even just making a good game, it was money. And if you need proof that this was the only motivation here, look no further than the only game Battlecry Studios ever developed by itself. Battlecry, a freemium game with tons of microtransactions. And seeing as how Fallout 76 also has tons of microtransactions, it's pretty safe to say we know why they were put on this project. Obviously, the plan here was to hand the project off to a team that specializes in sucking money out of players, relying on the Fallout name in lieu of good gameplay to draw the suckers in. The fact that Bethesda thought they could pull this off without absolutely shredding their credibility shows that they're not just out of touch with their fans, they're out of touch with reality. And look, I get it, studios need to generate capital. It would be completely impractical for a major publisher to drop one game every 5+ years. Developing games costs a ton of money. There are salaries to be paid, investors breathing down your neck. It makes perfect sense that they would have to come up with ways to make money in between their mainline releases. But the best way to do that is to just make a good game. Games don't have to be massive open-world experiences with 20 billion features to be good. The Doom games, for example, are conceptually very simple, but they're fantastic. And even if making a good game isn't an option, if you need to make a microtransaction-laden piece of shit, don't fucking charge people for it. I mean, which lobe of the brain has to decay for you to think it's okay to force people to pay for inventory space in a game that already costs $60 fucking on release? I mean, my fucking god. The biggest problem here isn't that these companies are doing predatory shit to make money, that's just late-stage capitalism. The problem is that we're letting them continue to turn a profit from it. Like, don't expect these fucking demons in skin suits to grow consciences anytime soon. They're not gonna suddenly start caring about the art form, they're not gonna suddenly start caring about their players. They understand one thing and one thing only: numbers. If the numbers say their tactics are making them money, they will continue to employ those tactics, and hard truth incoming, anyone who continues dropping money on these shitty predatory games is complacent. So whose fault is it that the AAA side of the industry is fucking terrible? Is it Andrew Wilson's fault? No. Todd Howard? Nope. Yves Guillemot, or however the fuck you pronounce that? No. It's your fault. It's my fault. It is the fault of everyone who ever gave their money to these absolute ball hairs. So what can we do to end this horrible era in video game history? Well, for one, stop pre-ordering AAA games. Hold these companies accountable for the promises they make. Don't purchase a game strictly based on the promises, purchase it based on whether or not they followed through on those promises. Most companies will give out review copies to prominent game reviewers who, if they have any integrity, will tell you whether or not the game is everything the company said it would be. If a company isn't giving out review copies or only giving them out to a select few reviewers, developers, that's a massive red flag right there. Avoid that game at all costs because they know it's a piece of garbage. Another thing you could do is avoid microtransactions like the fucking plague they are. I'm not talking about skins or other things that have no effect on gameplay. Cosmetics do not make a game pay to win, and while we obviously prefer not to pay extra for content in a fully priced game, free-to-play with optional cosmetics is a business model that benefits everyone. Players play for free, and companies still make money. But anything that gives you an objective in-game boost, inventory space, combat upgrades, unlockable characters that are designed to be better than every other character, this is essentially forcing you to pony up or get murked, and we don't fuck with that. And finally, the most important thing you can do is support the indie side of the industry. I know that might sound like a biased take because I myself am an indie game dev, but hear me out. With a few rare exceptions, indie studios don't make a ton of money, and the ones that do aren't seeing numbers like these AAA companies do. They're out there making video games on pure passion, and most of them would choose integrity and quality over monetary gain any day. If we show these big publishers that what we want from our video games is quality, integrity, and a commitment to gameplay over all else, then they'll have no choice but to invest in these small studios or perish. Honestly, a world where indie studios have massive budgets and complete creative control is a world where we don't have another year-long game drought, let alone a decade-long one. We continue to see fantastic indie games serving up fresh ideas on little to no budget. Imagine what those games would be like with the manpower and budget to realize their true potential. So, to summarize, be a discerning consumer. Do your research, vote with your dollar. Don't just throw your money blindly at anything that you think looks cool. Keep in mind that buying a game means supporting a company, and supporting a company means supporting how they conduct their business. The video game industry is currently the most lucrative entertainment industry in the world, with the whole kit and caboodle being worth about 145 billion USD. That's almost a full Jeff Bezos. Numbers like that are going to continue to attract assholes like Andrew Wilson, who are going to focus less on product quality and more on how they can squeeze every last penny out of their consumer base. Don't reward that behavior. Treat these guys like the evil bosses they are and crush them like you would any boss that got between you and that incredible sense of satisfaction that makes you want to keep gaming. Alright, that's it for me. If you like my content and want to support me, you can do so by liking, commenting, subscribing, sharing this video with your friends, or any combination of those four things. If you feel like playing a really dumb game, you can go ahead and grab a copy of 2 Cubes Humping, which is totally free over on itch.io. Donations are, of course, appreciated. I'll leave the link in the description. And if you're at all interested, the BakaBaka Games team and I are working on another free game called Project Blackmore. This one isn't so much of a meme. It's a COD Zombies-style wave shooter with a Doom-like emphasis on movement and a Luigi's Mansion-esque sucking mechanic. If that sounds like something you might be interested in, you can watch our first devlog right here, and you can head on over to the Discord for updates and to interact with hundreds of people who are also hyped for this project. I'll leave that link in the description too. Oh, and I'd really appreciate it if you guys could comment your favorite games and most hated games down below. I'd like to do some more videos examining games from a design perspective, and I want to put together a list that's a good mix of gold and trash. Anyway, thanks for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one.